In this video, we're going to go over the command words, which are extremely important for you to understand them. A lot of students miss points because they don't really understand what those commands and words are asking. I'm also going to show some of the tricks. I'm also going to tell you which ones are the most common ones. So let's start with the first one, which is define. Define is very common to show up in IB exams, and it's very straightforward. It's usually the vocabulary definitions of different types. It can be functions too, or anything going on. Here is the most important thing. You do not have to memorize word by word of the vocabularies the teachers tells you. There are keywords. If you have those keywords in your sentence, that's what matters. So a lot of students think that they have to be exactly memorized and understand what's going on. No. The keyword is what you get there. So for instance, here we have define, diffusion, and osmosis. What is important is that just the underlying words. If you're talking about concentrations and you're talking about passive movements, some of these words need to be there. And if they are there, then your definition is good to go. That's how it works. Another one is describe. Describe is very common to appear in papers. Very common, especially on paper 2. So the describe is basically you're telling the mechanism. You're telling step by step, or you're describing certain structures in very much details. The more details you do, the better it is. Now, when it comes to descriptions, it can be in sentences, and it can be drawings, it can be so many different ways, but as long as you tell every single detail you can think of. Now, it can be also talking about describing certain ways of measuring, like this one, describe how biomass can be measured. It can be in words, so it doesn't always have to be about design and everything. Next one is the explain. I do want to talk about the difference between describe and explain because this is where students lose most of their points. When it comes to explain is the same as describe, as in it's telling you the steps, but the explain has an additional information, which is why is that step happening? So just give you your analogy of a step. So let's say there was a table, and in the table there was an apple, and the apple fell on the floor. That will be a description, right? Just an apple on the table fell on the floor. That's a description. However, if you have to explain the situation, it will be that the table was pushed. And by the table being pushed, there was a force put into the apple, and the apple was hit by that force, and that's why the apple fell out of the table. And with the gravity that was pushing the apple downwards, that's why the apple went down and eventually fell on the floor. So if you notice, there was a why the apple fell out of the table, and there was a why the apple went all the way down to the floor. There was a gravity and the force. So that means there was an explanation behind that. And many times students lose point in the explain because they only tell the description, but they don't explain the whys in between the things that are happening. The explain is absolutely 100% following in every single IB exams. You will always see an explain, especially on paper 2 on section where there's extended question answers. The last question most of the time will be explained. So it's usually 7 to 8 points, so you really have to be good in doing these kind of questions. Now, a lot of students say, does explain always has to be paragraphs? That is not true, right here. Sometimes explain, you can get points by drawing annotations on the sides and by putting charts. So it's not always about writing a nice essay paragraph. So remember that when it comes to essays, like for example, enzymes, if you draw some graphs showing limit factors affecting the enzyme activity, or if you're drawing and explaining something about translation and you want to draw the ribosomes, these you also can get points. So don't think that it's just about words, but also drawings, annotations can get you points. Outline. Here is where I see students lose most points. When they think outline, they know that it's bullet points, but they are so brief. Don't do that. In outline, make sure that every bullet point you're writing a full information with as much as detailed key points in there. Many students lose those points because they go so general and so overview of the whole situation. That's not what outline is about. You still have to be details. And here's the important thing you need to know. You don't get points off for writing more information. You get points for contradicting yourself. So if I say apple was blue and the next moment I say apple was green, that's a contradiction. But if I write the entire history of apples and what they look like and where they come from and every single thing, even though they're just asking for location, you're not going to get points off. The only bad side, of course, you're losing some time with it, but you're not getting any points for putting as information. So don't be too generous. I wouldn't say generous. I would say too, stingy on your words. Get as many information down written on the outline. Just remember the outline has to be in bullet points. When it comes to some students would draw and forget to label. You can't just draw and not label. It's written draw, but automatically as you see draw, that means you also have to label the entire drawing. You got to be very clear on your drawing, and the labels, the lines, have to place them on the right spot. So for instance, if you have, let's say here, let's put here a drawing of a cell, and you want to do the cell membrane. If you do this line and you can see that you have kind of crossed a bit of that line, and you see that that's a cell membrane, you're not going to get the point. Why? Because that crossing of that line, now for me, this is already telling me that this is a cytoplasm. So the pointing of your lines have to be exactly at the spot of that line in order to get the points. So keep that in mind. When it comes to annotate, this is the difference from drawing. Drawing, you have to do everything from scratch. Annotate, they already have a diagram there. They already have a table. They already have a drawing. And you just have to put some additional notes. It's brief notes. It's not one word, okay? It's not a one word. Annotations means you're writing a couple sentences. One sentence of, like right here that you can see, FSH and HP causing evolution. That's a sentence that explaining something. Or you can have a couple of informations like these. This is what annotation is an additional information that you're writing. Sometimes annotate can be just annotate an arrow, but do not just put one word if they're asking to show something, explain something in a graph. List. Here's about the students with the list. So the list, they give you a list of, let's say, like in this case, we have listed the 7 levels of hierarchy taxa. So you have listed all here. But let's just say they say list the top 2 soccer teams in the world, right? Just give an example here. So list the top soccer teams in the entire area. So you like, shoot, I don't know what are the top 2, but I know a bunch of soccer teams. So what do? You start naming them all as much as you can, shooting as many soccer teams as you want. Here is how we grade as an IB examiners. We are only allowed to look at the first 2 because the question only asks for the 2. They said, what are the top 2? So that means we'll look at the first 2. Maybe on number 4 and number 5, you wrote the right names, but we don't look after the 2. So we look at the first 2 words that you're writing down. So you got to be very careful because list does not mean you go and put a bunch of names and just hope for the best that one of those are right. No, we will look for the amount that we ask. So if it's 3, we will look at the top 3. If it's 4, we'll look at the top 4. So make sure that you're putting in order the ones that are most likely to be the right answers in the beginning, because that's the ones we're going to look for. After the rest of the list, we don't even look. Then it comes to label. Label, this is the moment where you just have to put a one word. The drawing will be there, and you just have to label the word. So for example, here you can see the B, right? So it will be just labeling the name. That's what label is. It's different than annotation where you write more words. And of course the drawing, which is the drawing and the label going on. Then construct. Construct can be so many things. It can just construct a graph. It can be constructing a drawing. It can be constructing a pyramid like this one here, where they give you some information and then you build up. Or you can construct a dichotomous key, which you're going to learn about it. Or it can be even about a cladistic. It's about building something. So in building that with some information, that's the construction. Compare, contrast. You have to remember that compare does not mean talking about the difference. When IB, we will say compare, it means tell me the similarities between things. Contrast is the one that you see the difference. When you see both, that means you have to put both. So one thing is important, that if you're going to write as sentence, and if you're contrasting, they have to be in the same sentence. So for instance, look at this. Ventilation rate continues to increase where the tidal volume approaches a plateau. So on the same sentence, you are comparing. And that where can be while, whereas, and because you are comparing them on the same full sentence. You can also do as charts, but as long as the charts on the rows, we're talking about the same thing. Look, the first ones, they're talking about life conditions, but it's on the same row. If they are in different rows, you don't get points. They have to be in the same row. Another thing you got to take into consideration is to say compare, contrast. And if it says 6 points here, it doesn't have to be 50-50. It doesn't have to be 3 similarities and 3 differences. No, it can be 2 to 4. It can be even 1 to 5. But as long as you're putting some similarities and some differences, that is considered still okay. Distinguish. This one is the one that is completely differences. And this one, it is important that you mention their difference. It can be in sentence, it can be definitions. Most of the times, I will see the answers having to be sentence where you put them all together. While this guy is big, this one is small. Something like that, which connects them. Then apply. Apply here can be so many things. Like you can apply a theory, a law, an equation. You might have some kind of program like a dichotomous key in which you have to apply your knowledge about this key and find the answers. That's what apply is. It can also be apply of a certain graph. So it can be anything like related to you having to use your mind to come up with the answer through some kind of system. Then you have evaluate. Evaluate most likely happens in paper 2 when you have a graph or data and you have to evaluate that data and come up with a conclusion out of it. That's where it mostly comes in paper 2. So you can see here, you just give an example of the global war using figure A and B. So you're evaluating by describing A and you're evaluating by describing B and coming with a conclusion with this. Also can be evaluating graphs like I show here, figure A, figure B, and you're looking at these graphs and you're evaluating them and coming with an answer. Then you have estimate. Estimate usually is that you're coming up with some kind of quantity, like a number. And usually that number can also come with a unit. So every time you're going to put a number in there, make sure you also put a unit. It can also be about talk about estimating population, which is very common in the ecology sections where they're talking about finding the population size, estimating the amount of flowers and stuff. So that's very common to see questions related to ecology that has the word estimate in there. Here's an example right here, population size. So you're going to see some of these population equations and you will have to explain how to estimate them. Sometimes it needs numbers to calculate and sometimes it's just describing how these equations or these methods are used to estimate some situation. When it comes to predict, this is straight to a graph, okay? They see a graph and they see a trend happening and they say, what do you think is going to happen after? This is a prediction. You're telling me what's going to happen afterwards. So here it says predict with a reason. And this is where students make the mistake is that they do predict, but they do forget to give the reasons. If you predict without the reason, you don't get the points. Even though it might be 1 point, it's not enough. So that means you're going to predict, like, I think it's going to increase. But you got to tell me why it's going to increase. Otherwise, you don't get the points. That's how it works. Here's also with the graphs. Sometimes they will tell you to predict in a certain graph. If it doesn't say with reason, just predict, then you just put a certain word or a certain number. But if there's a reason, you also have to give the logic behind it. Then identify. Identify is the easiest one because identify usually will be like a number with a unit or just one word. Or you're looking at something and identify. But that is very straightforward. Now, most of the time in IB bio, it will be about identifying a number. Okay? Suggest, I barely see it in the IB exams, but suggest will always be in paper 2 when it comes to graphs after you have gone through all the analysis and they ask you to give us suggestions right after the whole analysis of it. Here's an example, putting the graph again. You will come up with some graphs analysis and you're just going to suggest what's the possible reasons why these lines went up or suggest what are the possible outcomes afterwards. So it's just you giving an educated guess, I guess. State. Guys, state is one freaking word. State a phylum. Or here it says a state what species are mostly distant related to the steep percancy and the base of the gap. You see, it's just one word. So most of the time, state is just going to be one word. That's all. Analyze. This is mostly going to be found on paper 2. Again, with the graph analysis, you're analyzing some graphs. But it also can be paper 1 when it comes to the lab study you're going to do. You're going to have to analyze an experiment that has been done and tell what happened. Did it increase? What is the logic behind? That's what analysis is. You're examining the whole biological process and you're telling me what's coming out of it. Here's an example how graphs going on too. Calculate. Calculate, obviously, there will be some equations that you're going to have to know, and these equations will be able to apply, and you calculate. What is extremely important is that you put the number and the unit. Many times students lose points because they forget to put the units. They put the right number without the unit. So please, every time you have any answer that is related with number, put the unit next to it, unless it's magnification where it doesn't have a unit. Here's an example of a calculation, which you're going to see a lot of calculations when it comes to microscopes and micrographs. So that magnification, which is image over actual size, that shows up a lot in the IB exam. So don't skip that. Learn how to use a microscope. Learn how to calculate those sizes because they usually show up all the time. And then we have here the last slide, which is about measuring. The measure is just basically you finding with a ruler a certain value, or you're coming with a calculator. But most of the times, these will be just using the ruler and you measure. But I haven't seen it. I've seen more calculate. So these are the most common command words. Some of them are barely seen, but again, you will definitely find describe, outline, and explain. These three are always coming. So as long as you understand what they mean, you're good to go. So this is it for the administration section. See you.